Hi, I'm Pat Murphy-Racey. I am a sponsored photographer by Sony. I own two A1s that I paid for all by myself. I have the 604, the 400 GM, and a bunch of other GM glass, the primes. Love them. I wanted to say that up front because I do have an opinion here, and my opinion might be colored somewhat by my experience shooting Sony over the last, well, I guess it's 8 years now. I left Canon and Nikon I started to leave in about 2013, and as soon as they made the 400-2.8 and the A9 and I could get those together, I was gone. No regrets, but that's not what this video is about. I just want to be upfront about who I am and my experience. I've shot Canon, I've shot Nikon, and I'm now a Sony shooter big time. Today, finally, the announcement has come with all the specifications of the Canon R3. And I thought it'd be worth going over a sort of a point-by-point reference of the specifications because the camera is not quite what I was hoping for. I, of course, want Canon and Nikon to make awesome cameras that compete with the Alpha 1. And instead, what they've done with the R3 is made a camera that's really going to compete well with the A9 II, which costs a lot less money, but that's another thing. So what we're going to do today is I'm just going to compare the Alpha 1 to the R3 specs. Now, I haven't shot the R3. I don't know anything about it other than what I saw on the web today. But I think it's worth doing a point-to-point thing as a still shooter. Let's get into it. So first of all, they both shoot 30 frames per second in electronic shutter, which is great. Finally, they caught up. And now Canon is now going as fast as Sony has been going for quite some time. There's a small difference, and it's a little smidgen one, but I think it's worth pointing out that the Sony A1 can produce 155 frames of continuous shooting in RAW before it has to stop and start writing the card. The Canon can only achieve 150 frames, so you're 5 frames short. Now, as a sports photographer, I can't tell you the last time I shot 150 frames consecutively. I just don't do it. It's not smart because you have to edit them on deadline, and that's pointless. So I think that doesn't really matter. The second one does matter though. The Alpha 1 is 50 megapixel. That's 50 megapixel. The R3 is a kind of a surprising 24 megapixel or 24.1 to be accurate. Now that means that if the camera allows users to punch in like we do with the Sony A1 and the A9 II and the A9 and really all the other cameras that Sony makes, where you punch in and go to APS-C on the sensor, you're zooming on the sensor, that means you're going to end up with a very, very small file on the R3 if you do that. And I can understand, like, there are times when I turn down my Alpha 1 to make a smaller file because I just don't need a big file. But in sports photography, I want that big file because I'm going to crop the bejesus out of whatever I'm doing. So I think that's a loss to Canon. The second thing is another loss. The Sony Alpha 1 has two CFast Type A card slots, which also dual task as SD card slots. For some reason, the R3 has only one super fast card slot, and that's a CFast Type B, which is a larger card. And then they have another card slot that's SD. And so this it's a little weird because on the A9 and the A9 II, the camera could only go as fast as the slowest card if they were writing at the same time. Now, maybe Canon's figured out a way around that, I don't know, but I don't like the fact that you can't use the two of the same cards. It bothers me. So I think that's a loss to Canon. The flash sync speed is 400th of a second on the Alpha 1 on mechanical shutter to strip like strobes in arenas and hockey, basketball, whatever. Sadly, it's only 2/50th of a second on the R3. So that's another loss to Canon. The EVF resolution, another loss to Canon. The Alpha 1 is 9.44 mil dot. The R3 is only 5.76 mil dot. So what you are seeing through the EVF, when you're looking through the EVF, that means eye level viewfinder. When you're looking through the camera during a sporting event or whatever you're shooting, your resolution is going to be much less than on an Alpha 1. Now again, this is not maybe that big a deal because the Canon R3 has it's a decent mil dot, But when you punch in, the camera has to resample, and it can't resample the EVF. And so you get this fuzzball looking thing. So when I'm shooting the Alpha 1 and I punch in, the viewfinder drops down to about what an R3 is going to look like all the time when I'm at APS-C. So that's a problem, and I think it's kind of unfortunate. Another loss to Canon. The refresh rate of the EVF. Now this is for people that are new to mirrorless. This is something that a lot of people don't understand, and every day I look at Facebook and I see all these people trying to figure out why rolling shutter is affecting their still pictures of action where there's like warped body parts and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that is awesome about the A9, the A9 II, and especially on the Alpha 1 is the refresh rate of the EVF is 240 frames per second. Now that is blazing fast. It's blazing fast. And if you're covering luge or really shooting tight in tennis, some auto racing, if you're doing pans and you're really tight, if the EVF can't refresh fast enough, you don't get to follow the action. And what you have to do is you have to zoom back out or use a different prime and back off so that you don't lose the subject in the frame. So when you're really going for the tightest possible action, the R3 is going to be greatly inferior to the Alpha 1. The next thing is a win to Canon, and that is their maximum shutter speed is 1/64,000th of a second, which betters Sony Alpha 1 by double. Getting to shoot at 32,000th of a second with the A9 back in 2017 was a real treat because I'd never been able to do that before. And you could go out and shoot with a 55-1.8 in bright sunlight and shoot wide open, no problem. I couldn't really do that before unless you use neutral density and all that stuff. So kudos to Canon for figuring out how to do 64,000th of a second. That's a win to Canon. The next one is the mechanical shutter frame rate when you're doing AFC. So the Alpha 1 can only achieve 10 frames a second. Canon betters that by 2 frames at 12 frames per second. That's a win to Canon. Although, one of the things I would point out is that there used to be a real reason to go and use mechanical shutter because we had to deal with anti-flicker. But now the Alpha 1 is able to handle alpha flicker on the electronic shutter side of things at 30 frames a second. So unless you're using a strobe, you don't really need to ever go to the mechanical shutter anymore, really at all. So I'm not sure it's a huge win for Canon, but we'll call that a draw maybe. The Canon Alpha 1 is really tiny. The form factor is really small and it has a removable grip. And of course the R3 does not have a removable grip. So you're stuck with that thing. And when you're trying to do those really low angle images where you put the camera on the ground looking up for basketball, for instance, there's going to be a slight edge to the Alpha 1 because you can take the grip off and use it that way. There's 759 autofocus points, that is to say phase detect autofocus points, which phase detect is all that matters really in mirrorless. And the Canon bests that with 1,053. Congratulations, that's awesome. Now, in the weight, you kind of know what's happening here. The Alpha 1 with a battery and a card in it weighs 1.6 pounds versus the R3 at 2.2 pounds. You kind of knew that was coming. Sony has been just like incredible about packing tiny, tiny, tiny packages, but making them really full. So a win to Sony there. I can't really confirm this, but I'm almost certain that the HDMI port in the R3 is a mini one. It's not the micro of the other like the Sony uses, but it's the mini one. And of course the Alpha 1 has a full-size HDMI port, which is really, really handy. And because the Alpha 1 is so strong in video, that makes a big difference when you're doing production. And finally, the price. You know, there's only $500 difference between these two cameras. And to my way of thinking, the big hit for the R3 is definitely the 50 megapixel versus 24. For me, because I shoot on strobes a lot in hoops, I really hate that they only have 250 sync instead of 400 sync for strobes. The EVF resolution is a big deal. 240 frames in the EVF refresh rate is a big deal. And anybody that says it's not hasn't shot enough mirrorless yet. And let's see. Yeah, I think I'm just going back to what I said. Now, there's one other problem with the R3. And again, as a Sony shooter, perhaps the biggest problem with the R3 is even if it was an awesome camera and did better on most of the points that we just talked about, none of my G Master glass will fit on it or work on it. And I am so incredibly happy, overjoyed with the quality of images and the sharpness I get, the way the color is rendered through the glass that Sony is offering me, that it's a no-brainer. I'm just going to stay where I am. Now, you probably knew that anyway, because I'm a sponsored shooter. A bunch of you are going to say, oh, I can't listen to anything he says because he works for Sony. I don't work for Sony. I'm a self-employed freelancer like many of you. But I am sponsored by them. So I'm being upfront about that, but man, I don't see any competition here between the R3 and the Alpha 1. So I guess I'm just shocked that Canon didn't produce a camera better than the A9 II at this juncture in mirrorless. I was hoping they would go farther and get more out of what they produced, but at least they've made it to the A9 II, which is great. Congratulations, Canon. I'm Patrick Murphy-Racey. Thank you so much for watching.